Hey art fiends! Welcome back to the channel. I've got a new type of video for you guys today. I've had this idea for a while, but never knew how I wanted to go about executing it until now. I have a lot of OCs that I've wanted to share with you guys, and I figured that this video series would be a fun way to share my different groups of characters with you all and give you a look into the history behind each of them. What I've done is redraw every one of these characters in every single version that they have existed as. For this first set of characters, there are 4 major design changes that I redrew. This specific group of characters were first created by me in 2012, back when I was 16 years old. At the time, I was huge into Homestuck, and these characters started off as Fantrolls for that series. If you are unfamiliar with Homestuck, trolls are a species of alien in the comic. They are those gray-skinned, orange-horned characters you may have seen around, but may not have been aware of what they were. Homestuck was basically the only thing I cared about at this time in my life, so creating my own characters only seemed to make sense. They had their own crazy story of a fail spurb session that they all took part in, and had a lot of drama between the characters. In 2013, a year later, I actually made human versions of them for fun, not realizing at the time that this would be the direction that these characters would take. By the time I was leaving high school, my interest in Homestuck had almost completely died out, but I was still very invested in these characters that I had created. So instead of saying goodbye to them forever, I decided to make them into humans permanently. Their story became that of a bunch of normal high schoolers just living their day-to-day lives. All the crazy drama and antics from when they were Homestuck characters now became teenage drama instead. I had a fun time translating some of the character traits into a more human experience. Because these characters started as trolls, I have a specific order that I always put them in, and that is the caste system. So instead of going in order of importance, we will stick to this order because it's a lot easier for me to talk about these guys when they are told in this way. If you don't know, the caste system is in the order of the rainbow. Trolls with red blood are the lowest on the order. The peasants, if you will. Those with pink blood are the highest, the royal elite. So imagine the colors of the rainbow and you've got the order that I will be talking about these characters in. So I'm gonna get into my speed paints for each of these characters, and I'll talk a bit more about each of them individually as I do. Quick warning in advance, my iPad recorded some of these at a lower quality than others, so for the first half you may notice a low quality in the recordings, but they should be fixed towards the end of this. I'm very sorry about that. My settings have been updated, so hopefully it won't record such low quality in the future. First up is Layman. He is actually one of the more important characters out of all of these. He started as very shy, but friendly all the same. He was quiet and not very assertive. He was into knitting and made the scarf that he wears himself. I don't want to spend forever explaining Homestuck terms, so I'm just gonna skip over all the things that you won't understand if you haven't read the webcomic. Something important about him was that he really liked birds and bird watching. A big plot element had to do with him and the character that would be his future boyfriend, where he asks the other to document some really big birds for him, and things don't go so well. He's very insecure, especially about his relationships. He always feels like the others are just pretending to like him. This mainly came from him being the lowest on the caste system, the most looked down upon of the troll race. When turning him into a human, it made sense to give him red hair since that was his color, and that is a color that is normal for humans to have. In the first version of all of these characters, I kept the clothing relatively the same in the fashion and the coloring. Since he was now a ginger, I thought it would fit to give him freckles to match. Another thing I keep is the same eye color, trying to keep it as close to that original shade that represented their blood color as a troll. In his second human version, the biggest change was that I started diversifying the clothing, letting the characters wear more than one outfit all the time. My style at the time also had me drawing way more freckles on him than I had previously. Finally, his current version is a lot more chubby. His hair color is darker now, not such an eye-bleeding red to look at. His eyes got a little darker too, trying my best to make them a bit more realistic color for a human. I also go back to the small amount of freckles, since the simple way is how I do things now. With the changes into a human, changes in his story came too. His low placement on the caste system translated into him being from a very poor and broken household. His inner turmoils translate more to him struggling to be accepted by his parents as he realizes that he is gay. He does a really good job of hiding all his struggles, and he seems very outgoing to all of his friends. Our second character is Artina. Her interests involve painting and squirrels. Though also low on the caste system, Artina has a very different personality than Layman. Artina is way more energetic. She loves to talk even when it's about nonsense. She's very ditzy, always the last one to understand anything that is going on. Translating her into a human, since orange was her color, it made a lot of sense to keep her having darker skin and brown hair. The first version of her hair color was the same as her eyes, but in my more recent versions, I've darkened it a bit so it could stand out more from her skin tone. Funny enough, Artina was my first troll that I designed and was meant to be kind of a troll sona for me. This made her look a whole lot like I do, and her current human design really shows that. Though unlike me, current Artina is from Mexican heritage, which I am definitely not. Artina is less of a main focus in these characters, so her story was never as fleshed out as Layman's. As a human, her personality is very much the same. She's still into art, specifically painting, and can be found in the art room of their school after hours all the time. The third character to look at is Kalia. She is a later addition to the group, one of the last trolls I created. She is really into mechanics, building and fixing things. Her design was based on this idea, giving her a jumpsuit over the black t-shirt most trolls wear. She also has these huge goggles that she never took off, taking up a majority of the space on her face. She is very stoic, a girl of few words. She rarely ever spoke, and if she did, it was short and to the point. When making her into a human, I did a similar thing to her as I did with Artina. Since her color was brown, it seemed fitting to keep her hair and skin brown as well. Her first human version was very similar shades to the jumpsuit she had been wearing. I did decide to put her goggles on top of her head too, so that they didn't look as if they were attached to her head anymore. Version 2 of Humankalia took a strange turn. At this point, for some reason, I didn't like extremely dark skin on characters. Even my characters who were supposed to be black would be lightened to whatever point was enough that they were still the race I wanted them to be, but they were not blending in with my black line art. Why 2015 me was like this? I don't know. But because of this, Kalia's skin became a lot lighter than it was before. However, when I was redesigning her recently, I went back to the darker skin color. I have a lot of characters with lighter browns for their skins, and since I was committing to her being African American at this point, there was no reason for her not to have a darker complexion. The brown I went with was less saturated than the original color for her human design, and her hair also became darker so that it wouldn't blend into her skin as it had in the first version. I also stopped drawing her with the goggles at this point, since it was odd that she was a high school kid always wearing these big goggles on her head. The body size changed as well. She still has that same personality as well as her interest in mechanics, so giving her a stockier build made a lot more sense for someone who was probably very strong. Moving on, the next character on my list is Zoros. An asshole since her creation, Zoros cares only about herself and her guitar. As a yellow blood, she has psychic powers. Hers was specifically that she could control electricity. She is definitely the meanest of all the characters, always ready to tell others everything wrong with them without hesitation. She also loved creating chaos, whether of her own creation or enabling others to do so. Making her into a human, since yellow was her color, it made sense to make her a blonde. The first version had a super bright yellow as the hair color that was definitely not natural looking. When I remade her the second time, I went with a less saturated yellow, one that looked more natural for a human to have. Her eyes stayed the original color, the final version having a bit more desaturation than before in order to make them seem a bit more natural as well. Her hairstyle went through a couple changes as well. All trolls tend to have curlier hair, but when I made her a human for the first time, I decided to make it more on the straighter side. But in my most recent version, I went back to the big poofy hair. Another big design change was the eyes. I love emphasizing eyes in the way I draw now, and glasses always became big shapes that fill the entire eye instead of being frames around an eye shape. So her big circle glasses now take up a lot of her face, which is super fun to draw. As for story changes, her personality is relatively the same. She's a little less destructive since humans don't have the same bloodlust that trolls have. She loves to meddle in her friend's business and is a huge gossip. Her love for causing mayhem hasn't gone away. We are now moving on to the most important character in this group, the one who is the main focus of this friend group. Venrus accidentally became the main character. He became my favorite pretty fast, and that led me to spending a lot more time on his story and characterization more than any of the other characters. Venrus used to be a very calm and friendly guy. He really loves gardening, and that didn't change after the accident happened. He was attacked by a giant bird and lost one of his horns and a chunk of his memory. His personality also shifted. He became a big grouch, always fed up with everyone else. One of the memories he lost was the fact that he was dating one of the other characters, since it had been a very new development before the accident. However, he grew a lot closer with layman at the time, which soon developed into their budding relationship. Another character also became like a sister to him. She was very close to him and was the one to help him after the accident happened. Moving on to him as a human, his first version was a completely different race than he ended up being. After knowing what he looks like now, seeing him with this dark skin is very odd to me. I have no idea where his colors came from, to be honest. Unlike the other characters before him, his color was green, so that wasn't a natural color for hair to be. His eyes do stay that green in all of his versions, however. Version 3 brought him a lot closer to how he looks now. Just like Humalia, I, for some reason, went through a phase of just making everything lighter. However, this did end up making me decide on what race Venrus would actually be. He is half Italian, half Native American, so his lighter skin tone made a lot of sense with this being his ethnicity. I am very attached to his current colors, so a darker skinned Venrus seems odd to me. In the final version, his skin is now a little bit darker, but his hair color is still that light brown. As for his story, I had a lot to do to make it fit a human world. His accident became a car crash, one that caused his father to pass away. His mother had been gone since he was little, so now that he was left alone, he moved in with his cousins, the character who had taken care of him when he was a troll. The car accident messed with him a lot. The memory loss was just one symptom he faced. He now also has constant migraines and pretty bad anxiety to top it off. His personality change stayed as well. He became very pissy and closed off to all his friends. However, he does still grow closer to layman after this. It was layman's house he was on his way to when it happened, so layman felt some responsibility. This turns into them dating, and the two of them learn to help each other with all their various problems. Venrus is also still into gardening, his family owning a flower shop that his mom started before her passing. He works there with his cousins, doing his best to keep his family legacy going. As I stated earlier, Venrus is my favorite character of these characters. I love sassy characters with tragic backstories a whole lot, and Venrus may have been me presenting this without realizing when I was younger. Next up, we have Lamia, otherwise known as Venrus's cousin. Lamia is also a very sassy character, but unlike Zoros, who is aggressive, and Venrus, who is pissy, Lamia is more on the suave type of sassy. She is that cool kid that everyone wants to know or wants to be. In the troll world, she lived very close to Venrus, which is how she was able to get to him after the accident happened and help nurse him back to good health. She grows protective over him at this point, coming to view him as family. Going into her human look, she also started a lot darker skinned than she ends up being. At this point, I knew I wanted her and Venrus to be related, but hadn't figured out what relationship that would be yet. So their skin colors were always in the relative same ballpark. She also had pure black hair at first, which once I figured her out, goes away for a more dark brown color. I always depicted her chewing gum as a troll, and when she became a human, I would continue that sometimes, but I also added in smoking as well. I really wanted to push that cool kid vibe, and while you definitely shouldn't smoke kids, it fit this chill persona I was aiming for. By the third version, I knew that I wanted her relationship with Venrus to be cousins. This made her full Native American. Their mothers were sisters, and Venrus's father was the Italian one. Something you may notice is how many different styles her hair went through, but how they stayed within the relative same design. Her troll design had a very specific look to her side bangs, and turning that into a human, I tried for these drill curls. However, young me never had a good way of drawing them correctly, and I was getting fed up with drawing them every time I wanted to draw lamia, so I ended up going with this very wavy hair instead. Otherwise, her personality was basically the same. She still has that cool kid personality, but she is very protective over her family. Up next, the character we will be talking about is Terion. He was another later addition to these characters. Terion is afraid of almost everything, preferring to stay with what he knows than try anything new. He's also mute, which wasn't a big problem when he was a troll since they always communicate through text messages. He's that one friend that everyone just wants to protect. When making him a human, to keep that innocent look, I wanted lighter colors for him. His eyes stayed the teal that was his original color, but his hair became this orange-brown. He may be one of the few characters who didn't have a lot of color changes from his first human version to his current one. Something that did happen to him when becoming a human was he became more important than he was originally. He is now one of Venrus's closest friends, meaning he had a lot more screen time than some others have. He is childhood friends with the next character that we will look at as well. And his most important relationship is that with his boyfriend. He somehow managed to soften the bratty rich kid, and the two of them become partners in the process. Because of him, most people in the friend group know how to speak sign language as well, and if not, they are on their way to learning. Next up, we have Humalia. Though she isn't as important as Venrus is, she did end up being another of my favorites. Her importance is lessened mainly because she was also a later addition to the group. Humalia is like that popular girl that is mean to almost everyone, but for some reason everyone still loves her. Her entire personality is just sass. As a troll, she wore these big sunglasses, which I keep on her for every human version, except for the most recent. She can still wear those glasses, I just wanted to depict her in a way that made it easier to see her whole design. Making her into a human, she had a few close friendships that helped develop her look. She's besties with Zoros and Lamia, so depicting her with a cigarette was part of their cool girl persona. She is childhood friends with Terion, so I figured their parents would be friends as well. With that thought, it would make sense for them to have similar colors. However, by the third version, I moved her away from Terion's colors, making her more of a ginger and less of a strawberry blonde. Because of the red-haired look, she also got freckles like Layman did. Similar to Layman, she also went from having a whole lot of freckles to only having a couple for my personal stylizing reasons. Humalia is a very fashionable girl, one of the reasons I love drawing her so much. Being besties with Zoros and Lamia, the three of them get into trouble a lot. Lamia is the most grounded of the three, acting kinda like a parent when they all go way too far. Moving on, next to talk about is Kemlin. As a troll, his biggest interests were math and baking. Why I came up with that combo, I cannot tell you. Kemlin was one of the first trolls I made, and his personality changed a lot, even before becoming a human. His very first version was very kind and friendly, but with the addition of more characters, he somehow became hardened. He is very blunt and no nonsense. He becomes best friends with Venrus, not being afraid to smack some sense into Venrus when he gets a little too much in his own head. Kemlin also has a massive crush on Artina, but he is way too chicken to say anything to her. Turning him into a human, he started with that same black hair that the troll version had. As time went on, his hair got shorter and shorter. By the third version, I had decided that he comes from a very strict Japanese family, so him having such long hair didn't fit him anymore. Kemlin is a rule follower. He wouldn't ever do anything that visibly goes against his parents' rules. He is very hard on himself because of this, however, since he is the parents' poster child. His older brother rebelled against his parents and went off to do his own thing, leaving Kemlin to fit the perfect child role instead. Similar to Zoros, Kemlin's glasses become a bigger part of his design in the current version over the past design he had. He is still best friends with Venrus, adding Terion into that mix to create the main trio. He also still has that crush on Artina, and he still is not saying anything about it to her. The next character up is Nutella, another latecomer. She is still one with the least development in her character or story. A motherly personality, she is very into singing. She also loves love and would play matchmaker to all of her friends. Making her design human, I went with something that screamed generic female pop singer in her colors. By version 3, her hair darkened up a bit, however, making her less blonde and more dirty blonde. Her iconic side ponytail doesn't go away, but her bangs do go through a few iterations. Although she has little story, Nutella is another character I enjoy drawing. Like Humalia, she is very fashionable. However, unlike Humalia, she tends to dress more modestly. The two have very different fashion styles, but they are both equally enjoyable to dress up. Nutella is still very interested in other people's love lives, meddling the most with terions. She is very good friends with the rich kid he ends up dating, always pushing him to share details as well as help him understand his feelings. She is a very nosy wingman. Moving on to Harmik for our next character. As a troll, Harmik has a very interesting story. However, that story was the hardest to translate into a human being. As a troll, Harmik had psychic powers like Zoros did. His was that he saw glimpses of the future, but the futures he saw were all from different timelines. He couldn't determine what was from his timeline and what wasn't. He ends up becoming a ghost before the game starts, which does make controlling his powers easier. He was always very cryptid in the way he spoke. He was very ominous, speaking in riddles and half-truths. Everything about him was very supernatural, making his transition to human very difficult. Trying to keep his personality similar, he stayed very nonsensical. He's driven by facts, and he is super knowledgeable in various topics. But he does still have an interest in the occult, more from a scientific perspective than a supernatural one. For his colors, I went with brown skin and dark brown hair in the first version, which didn't change much in his redesigns. With the colors I chose, I decided that his ethnicity would be Filipino. His eyes were the most interesting to work with. Since he had two different colored eyes as a troll, I wanted to keep this in his human form. The first version had one eye match his original purple, and the other matching the bright red that his other eye was when he was alive. However, bright red is really not a natural eye color, so that ended up becoming a brown instead as time went on. His body shape also changed in my most recent design. He was never a very active person, so I decided to widen his body. Harmik and Kalia also become good friends once they become humans. Their serious personalities meshed really well together. We finally made it to the Sea Dwellers. The first of these high blood characters is Rima. Cute and charming, Rima is very dumb on all things that aren't high blood related. She has no idea how the lower caste lives and is very unaware of the privilege that she has. Although she is adorable and friendly, her favorite things are sharks, always hanging around the animals. Rima is the girl that Venrus completely forgot he was dating when he lost his memory. Although she fell for the kind version of him, Rima still has romantic feelings for Venrus. She struggles to tell him though, since he changed so much. She doesn't like layman, however, since she feels that he took Venrus from her. But Rima is too nice to ever outright say anything she is feeling to either of them. When turning her into a human, she stayed with the black hair and was given a darker complexion to match. She always had a similar hairstyle, the long black ponytail, but the way I went about depicting it changed a lot as my style changed. Because of the colors I chose, as well as trying to stay with her original personality, I decided that she is from a rich Indian family. She still has no concept of wealth, not understanding her status in society. Everything about her stayed the same, from her charming personality to her deep jealousy of Layman and Venrus. As a troll, she was best friends with Artina, and that stayed the same as a human. The two of them are both kind people, Artina being the more extroverted of the two. Artina is also the only other character who knows that Rima started dating Venrus right before the accident, acting as Rima's confidant. Almost at the end now, we have our next high blood. Alnik is the textbook version of a spoiled rich kid. He thinks he is so much better than all the other characters because of his blood status. The only ones he respects are the last character, since he is the only one higher on the caste system than him, and Rima, since she is also a sea dweller like him. All Alnik really cares about is himself, and it takes a lot from the other characters to finally get him to stop being so conceited. As a human, I wanted to make him look as spoiled and white as possible. school. He started off a lot blonder than he becomes, mainly because I felt like I had too many blonde characters in their 2013 versions. His hair was always meant to be slicked back, but I wasn't that good at depicting that when designing his first versions. His personality was the same, still a very spoiled rich kid. However, a new addition was his relationship with Terion. Something about the shy mute kid got through to Alnic's hardened heart, and he asked Terion to teach him sign language in order to get closer to him. However, Alnic's parents are very old-fashioned, like he used to be, so their relationship stays a secret throughout their time in high school. Alnic is best friends with Nutella, spilling his romantic problems to her all the time. He also grew up around the final character we will look at, but they were never the closest of friends. Their parents are just both very wealthy, so they were forced to mingle at parties since they were usually the only kids there. We finally come to the last character. This is Stierro, the highest on the caste system out of this group. Unlike the other two, his wealth wasn't something he really cared about. Stierro was way more interested in superheroes than money. He was obsessed with the troll version of Captain America, his outfit being his own homemade superhero costume. Stierro is the most energetic of these characters, even more so than Artina. He loves adventure, and even more so when his friends are coming along with him. As a human, I did want a rich white kid look for him too, but since he doesn't really care about appearance like Alnic does, he's a bit more unkempt. As time goes on, his hair becomes more and more fluffy, probably not seeing a brush in many months. He would definitely dress in nicer outfits, mainly because his parents buy him all the expensive designer clothes, but he kind of throws on whatever from his closet with little sense of if they match or if they have wrinkles. Although he grew up around Alnic at the fancy adult parties, his actual childhood friend is layman. The two of them clicked in kindergarten and have been friends ever since. Unlike Alnic as well, Stierro's family is a lot chiller and open. Stierro is free to do what he wants, always knowing he will have his parents' support. Well, that was all 14 of my high school student characters. This video may have been very self-indulgent, but I loved being able to see the progression they went through over the years. Although I don't create as much content with them as I used to, they still hold a special place in my heart. Every now and then, I find myself returning to them and creating new little stories involving their daily lives. Before we say goodbye to these characters, I do want to add one last thing about them, and that is their sexualities. I personally don't focus too much on this aspect of my characters, preferring for relationships to form naturally as I tell my stories, but I know my audience and I know how much you all really want to know these things about any of the characters I make, so I'm gonna quickly run down the list so that if this is something you wanted to know about, you have this information. So, we have gay, straight, lesbian, straight, bi, straight, ace, bi, straight, demi, straight, pan, and straight. So, with all of that over, we've made it to the end. If you've enjoyed this new type of video, let me know down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on these characters and the progression that they took over the years. If you want to see more from me art-wise, please follow me on Instagram and Twitter. Links are in the description down below. Like, comment, share, and subscribe. All the things that the YouTubers say. Peace!